Really looking forward to our next fight coming up at lightweight. Yes, I said lightweight. We have Renato Moicano, the former standout at featherweight, taking on one of the most dynamic strikers you're going to find in all of MMA in Kyrgyzstan's Rafael Fiziev. Ataman is the nickname, and this guy is an atom bomb in the cage. That was a terrible dad joke. I apologize for it. I'm only 26 years old, but I look at this fight, and it's very, very much a clash of styles because Renato Moicano, long-rangey striker, a guy that can mix in a tidy little clinch game. He's got really good submissions too once the fight hits the mat. For Rafael Fiziev, this is a guy coaches at Tiger Muay Thai. And Matt, when I talk about a coach from Tiger Muay Thai, a lot of people are going to go, well, automatically Brad Riddell. Fiziev was his replacement. So it's kind of funny there. Both of those guys took on Magomed Mustafayev. For Fiziev, it was his first career loss in his first UFC fight. For Brad Riddell, he ended up picking a win up against Mustafayev in one of the better fights you're ever going to see. So for Fiziev, he comes back. He has a fight against Alex White, wins a decision. Then he wins a decision over Mark Jacare.
What a fight.
Kind of glossed over those. Fight of the night against Mark Jacare in an all-timer. And a good fight against Alex White where Fiziev, man, what does this guy do? Awesome hooks. He has some of the fastest hands you're going to find in MMA because a lot of guys throw a lot of the power hooks. You can see it coming on television from a mile away, but of course in the cage you can't. This guy has crazy speed. He has a lot of power. Hasn't really translated into any knockdowns so far, but you can tell Alex White took so much punishment in their fight. I was surprised one of the judges scored at 29-28, but maybe it was just for heart alone in one of the rounds for Alex White. White went 0 of 11 for takedowns. Mark Jacare went 0 of 4 for takedowns in his fight. So far, Fiziev has 100% takedown defense in the UFC. And I looked at that stat without doing any of the research. The first thing I did was go on UFC stats, go 100% takedown defense. So somebody's gone for 1, and that's about it. No, Fiziev's got pretty good takedown defense, especially for a striker. You watch the way that he defends some of these takedowns. For Alex White, he was going for the single legs. Fiziev kind of posts up and kind of sticks back a little bit and really does a good job of staying out of the way, really distributes his weight well on those takedown attempts, and does a good job of keeping himself standing. When it's in the clinch, he does not like to have his back up against the cage, and he pushes off really well. This fight against Moicano, though, it's really tricky because it's a huge step up in competition.
It really is, and I do think this fight comes down to a lot of in-betweeners. You can't really just look at the striking of both guys. You can't just look at the grappling of both guys. I do like what you brought up about the clinch work, especially with Fiziev with his back against the cage. That's one of Moicano's best positions. If he can get that really high Muay Thai clinch, it is weird too. With Moicano being the one coming up a weight class, he is a big guy at lightweight. Just frame-wise, he is really hard to deal with. He's sort of built like a welterweight almost. He's just sort of one of those tall, thin guys. And what you like about Moicano too, and what I always like with guys moving up in weight, he looked good in his first fight at 155. He is going to look even better in his second fight at 155 because it does take your body a little time to adjust. You sort of become a lightweight. You don't just become a featherweight who's not cutting weight anymore. And I think that's currently the process that Renato Moicano is undergoing. It's very much a style clash because Fiziev, does he have the power? Of course he does. Does he have the long-ranging hooks? Does he have the explosiveness? He has all those things. With Moicano, he just does the basics really, really well. You look at his boxing, he throws really nice straight shots down the middle. He has really nice kicks, too. He does hold his chin a little high, which is somewhat concerning. We've seen that cost him in past fights. But it is hard to take a lot from the Aldo and Korean Zombie losses, in my opinion, and apply that to Fiziev. Just because Jose Aldo is one of the greatest strikers really ever in MMA, and that stoppage was a little early. For me, it was. Maybe you thought it was just, but it was slightly early of a stoppage. Korean Zombie put him down, but if you hear Korean Zombie actually talk about what he did, he sort of planned all that out perfectly, which is just, I think that's more of a compliment to how good the Zombie is. And Moicano, I like the Calvin Kattar performance. It's the one that I always go back to. I know that was a few years ago and Kattar's improved quite a bit, but at the time it was just, these are these two really exciting young prospects. Let's match them up and see what happens. And that fight was not competitive in the least bit. And I know a lot of people in hindsight are probably thinking, well, goodness, did Calvin Kattar knock him out? Not at all. Renato Moicano, calf kicks for days. He really bothered Calvin Kattar, threw a ton of calf kicks, threw a ton of just kicks in general, and kept the fight at his range. And when we talk about those X factors, I think range is the first thing that we have to bring up because For Fiziev to win this fight, he's going to have to get on the inside, use his hooks, and really use his physicality to impose on Moicano. Where if you're Moicano, you have to use your footwork, you have to stick to the jab, and you really have to stay on your bike for the majority of the fight. Now, one thing I do love from Moicano is his output. And the weird thing about him, too, is probably the best example of his output is in a loss. The Brian Ortega fight, he never stopped throwing. And Brian Ortega, we know how good his boxing is. He was right in there with him in the pocket through a lot of those exchanges. And really, Moicano was winning that fight up until he went for one of the dumbest takedowns ever. But if he goes for that takedown on a guy like Fiziev, yes, Fiziev might defend it. He might, get taken down. Moicano on the mat against anyone not named Brian Ortega is giving people a ton of issues. He is phenomenal at jiu-jitsu.
In my brain, I look at Renato Moicano's last win over Damir Hadzovic, and Damir Hadzovic is a good fighter. I mean, his UFC run's been... Yeah, he's kind of like He's
Marcin Held before Marcin Held came to the UFC.
He's kind of like the shredded wheat. You like to eat shredded wheat for breakfast. It's all right, but sometimes you have the Oreo cereal. You have the weird sugary stuff. You like that.
The Reese's one.
Shredded wheat, it's all right. Damir Hadzovic, so it's a good win. I mean, it was a quick win. It was done in over a minute. Renato Moicano submits him. For me, I have a look over on the YouTubes. We put it out there in the YouTube community for a vote today. So this was only in 6 hours. 368 total votes. 60% of voters going with Fiziev to 40% going with Renato Moicano. Let's have a quick look over on Tapology. Tapology votes are different. 826, 61% going with Moicano, 46% saying he's going to get the win by submission. It's interesting because, again, Matt, you bring up a really good example. You look at Renato Moicano, and we talked about this kind of off camera earlier on in the day when we were talking about our picks. There's 2 fights that Renato Moicano has where he has a ton of success against fighters that are relatively similar to Fiziev. In relative terms, the win over Calvin Kattar and the win over Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens a little bit more so. Compact striker, really likes to throw with a lot of power, throws good kicks. Jeremy Stephens. Renato Moicano beats him by split decision, incorporates the takedown, overall out-volumes him in that one. Then you look at the win that he has over Calvin Kattar. It's a masterclass. But then he has 2 losses against primary strikers that like to throw that thunder in the pocket in Jose Aldo and Korean Zombie. Again, all-timers. I mean, everybody loves Korean Zombie except for everybody he's fought. And for Jose Aldo, I don't know why they don't put him in GOAT conversation, but the guy's a GOAT at featherweight.
Craig, they do. He's widely considered. I think Jose Aldo is the 5th best fighter ever. He's not on my Mount Rushmore, but if I ever decide that I'm going to add a 5th face to it, he would be the face I add.
Piotr Jan tried to pummel him out of there, but he's still up there for me. So overall, I look at those 2 fights, and they worry me a little bit now. For Renato Moicano, took a lot of time off between the Korean Zombie fight and the Damir Hadzovic fight, almost a year, and he picked up a really quick win. What can I learn from that? Not a lot. I mean, Damir Hadzovic, a good fighter, don't get me wrong. So is Fiziev. Fiziev's still early on in his MMA career. This guy has a Sambo background, training at a Tiger Muay Thai. He's really a jack of all trades, but it is that striking that's so good. And again, they're 2 different strikers. Moicano's got to work from distance if he's going to get a win. Fiziev's got to be able to crash that distance, land with a lot of firepower, which we've seen him do in the Alex White fight and in the fight against Jacare. So it is a tricky one to try and predict. It is.
Oh, 100%. Now, here's the thing I really like about Moicano. He's not only fought guys better than Fiziev, he's beaten them. Now, has he lost to those fighters as well? He has. But that's going to happen when your name's at the top of a division. And Moicano's a bit of a victim of how good he is. After that Jeremy Stephens win, because he beat Stephens early on in his UFC career, from that moment on, you knew he was never going to get an easy fight again. And just going through the list, Brian Ortega, Calvin Kattar, Cub Swanson, Jose Aldo, Korean Zombie. That was his run at featherweight after he fought Jeremy Stephens. Those are all, if not, well, at one point, other than Cub Swanson, those are all guys who could fight for the title at any given day. And with Aldo, he's one of the greatest fighters ever. So the level of competition for Renato Moicano has definitely been there, and he's a far better grappler than Alex White or Mark Jacare. And I really like Renato Moicano in this fight. He's the underdog. I like his range. I like his jiu-jitsu. I'm actually really looking forward to Renato Moicano's future at 155 pounds.
So let's talk about those odds, Matt. Paper notes. Renato Moicano opened up as a minus 105, just a slight underdog. He's now plus 128 for Fiziev. He's now at a minus 155, open as a minus 115. Over on Tapology, we talked about the votes. The voters on Tapology going with Moicano. The Fight Night Picks fans are going with Fiziev. I know that there's going to be a big skirmish down below in the comments, so let us know who you're going with. But Matt, that's the thing. Fiziev hasn't fought that same level of competition in MMA. We know he's a Muay Thai god. We know how good he is at Sambo, which is a great base to have, especially in a fight like this. And having that takedown defense, I like it now. Alex White isn't on the same level as Moicano. Alex White isn't on the same level as even Mark Jacare, so it's tough to really gauge what you're going to get. The one thing that I've noticed in a lot of the fights that Fiziev has had against different guys is the fact that the corners are always saying, we'll just throw straight shots up the middle. It's a lot easier said than done against a guy like Fiziev. So to me, this is one of the tougher fights to try and predict. I will slightly side with you in this one. I'm going with Renato Moicano as the underdog in this fight because, again, I've seen it against the highest level of competition. Now, granted, he's been finished. So you look at the fights. Fight of the night against Brian Ortega. He gets submitted. He had a performance of the night, win over Cub Swanson where he finishes him in the first round. The Aldo fight's tough. The Korean Zombie fight is also tough. You know what's weird? That was a main event. That's one of those cheap sign posters you can buy on the UFC's website because nobody cares. But overall, it's tricky, but I'm going to side with Moicano. And again, this is the one thing that I want to know from you. If Moicano is going to get a win over Fiziev, how's he going to do it?
Okay, there's actually quite a few ways, and that's the good news. Moicano can just stick the jab out there, stay on his bike, and probably win a decision that way. Now, he doesn't really fight in that style. He's a little bit more aggressive than that. I really like the range that he will be able to keep, though, throughout this fight. Whether it is the boxing range, Renato Moicano's boxing range is almost at Fiziev's kicking range. And I really like that for Moicano because the lacking striking defense that he does have will at least be a little bit fixed due to the fact that he's going to be able to stand at such a range from Fiziev. Fiziev could land one of those big looping shots as Moicano's sort of moving backwards with his chin up in the air. I just don't see it happening. And again, I'm not going to say that Renato Moicano is going to be a top 155er for his whole career, but I do think he's going to give a lot of guys at lightweight a really hard fight.
So Matt, we're both going with Renato Moicano in this fight. Both guy definitely has an opportunity to get the win and skyrocket themselves into that top 20 to 15 range with a win. And overall, Matt, really looking forward to our co-main event. Tony Ferguson taking on Charles Oliveira, and in the main event, Deiveson Figueiredo taking on a really tough out in the assassin baby, Brandon Moreno. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.